The drawing-room at Trelawarren Hall had gone very quiet, and in that quiet, every head had turned toward the same place, and the place was the corner where Demelza stood with her hands folded and her chin level and a lie already half-formed behind her teeth. The clasp of the necklace lay on the carpet between two chairs broken. The pearls themselves were gone. The Dowager Duchess of Roskilde held the velvet case open in both hands, tilted so the candlelight could find the empty hollow of it, and she did not raise her voice. She did not need to. A woman with that much rank had learned long ago that the room would lean toward a whisper the way a garden leans toward the sun. They were on the mantel an hour past, the Dowager said. Lady Eulalia saw them. Mrs. Carnzo saw them. And now they are not. Lady Rosenwind sat by the window, with her face the color of tallow, and her hands knotted in her lap, and she did not say a word, because the truth that would have cleared the air was a truth she could not afford to speak, and Demelza knew it, and the knowing settled in her chest like a swallowed stone. She had watched the girl's small panic build all evening. She had seen what no one else had seen. So when the Dowager turned the empty case toward her and asked in that even and terrible voice whether the companion had anything to say for herself, Demelza heard her own answer leave her before she had quite decided to give it. "The fault is mine, your grace," she said. "I had the pearls last across the room. Near the cold edge of the hearth, a man who had not yet spoken at all lifted his eyes and looked at her. He was the master of the house. He was the one person in that company who had been watching. Not the case, not the Dowager, not the scandal blooming in the candle smoke, but the small movements of a companion's hands all the long evening through. And what he had seen did not match the thing she had just confessed. That was the beginning of it. To understand how a hired woman came to stand in a duke's drawing room and take a theft upon herself, the story must go back a little to the wet October morning 3 weeks before, when Demelza first came down the avenue of bare elms and saw the gray towers of the house rise out of the Cornish mist. She had not wanted the position. She had needed it, which is a different and harder thing. Her father had been a clergyman of small living and smaller savings near Helston, a gentle scholar who had taught his daughter Latin, and the names of the stars and very little about how a woman survives in the world once the man who shelters her is gone. He had died in the spring. The living had passed to a stranger. The cottage had passed with it. By midsummer, Demelza had learned that an educated woman of 24, with good hands and no fortune, has exactly one door open to her, and that door leads downward into other people's houses to be useful and unseen. She had answered an advertisement. A companion was wanted at Trelawarren for a young lady lately come into a great inheritance, and lately also come under the guardianship of relations who meant to see that inheritance well married. The young lady was Lady Rosenwind, 18 years old, an orphan twice over. Shy to the point of silence and frightened of nearly everything, including the aunt who had charge of her, Mrs. Bia. Trembath, a brisk and ambitious woman who treated the girl's timidity as a fault to be drilled out of her, like a stain. Demelza understood the girl within a day. She understood that Rosenwind's silences were not stupidity, but terror, that the trembling of her hands at the dinner table came from being watched by people who had decided in advance what she was, and that the great inheritance everyone spoke of so warmly had bought her nothing she actually wanted. The fortune was a cage, with the door painted gold. To the household, Demelza was simply the companion, and the companion was nobody. She ate at the table, but below the salt. She walked behind in the gardens. Her gowns were 3, all of them gray or the brown of weak tea, made over twice and worn at the cuff, and the thin one let the Cornish damp straight through to the bone on the mornings she walked Rosenwind down to the chapel. The housekeeper, Mrs. Carnzo, was kind to her in the small ways that servants are kind to one another when the family is not looking. A heel of warm bread, a second candle, a word of warning before a difficult day. The rest of the house looked through her as though she were a draught. Then there was the master of it all, the Duke of Roskilde. He had been abroad when she arrived, and the house spoke of him the way houses speak of weather that is coming with a kind of braced respect. He had come into the title young, after his elder brother drowned in the cove below the abbey ruins, and the grief of it had set something in him hard, so that the servants called him just and cold in the same breath, and seemed to mean both as praise. When at last he returned, riding up the avenue on a tall gray horse in the rain, Demelza saw him first from a window. Dismounting in the courtyard, handing the reins to a groom without a word, his dark coat black with wet across the shoulders. He looked up once at the house, at the very window where she stood, and she stepped back, out of habit, the habit of a woman who has learned that being seen is rarely to her advantage. His name was Jago, though no one in that house would have dared to use it. He was 34. He had eyes the gray of slate after rain, and a way of going still before he spoke, that made other men hurry to fill the silence, and a reputation, carefully built for noticing everything, and forgiving very little. She did not expect him to notice her at all. He noticed her on the third day. It was nothing. She had been sent to the library to find a particular volume of sermons that Mrs. Trembath wished read aloud, and the Duke was already there at the long table, by the tall windows with the estate books open before him, and the steward, Mr. Penberthy, at his elbow. Demelza had murmured an apology and turned to go. She had nearly reached the door when the Duke's voice stopped her, low and even. "You read Greek," he said. She turned. He was looking at the book in her hand, which was not the sermons at all, but a small, worn Sophocles she had taken down by accident and forgotten she was holding. "My father taught me, Your Grace," she said. He said nothing for a moment. Penberthy looked from one of them to the other with the careful blankness of a good servant. Then the Duke nodded once, the smallest motion, and turned back to his books, and Demelza escaped into the corridor with her heart going hard against her ribs for a reason she could not have named and did not wish to examine. What she did not yet know was that he had marked it, not the Greek. The way she had answered him without lowering her eyes, the way a woman speaks who has been somebody once and has not forgotten how. Stay with me through this part, because everything that comes after turns on it. He was a man who had been lied to all his life by people who wanted his name and his money, and he had grown a great cold instinct for the difference between what people said and what they were. Demelza did not want anything from him. That alone made her worth watching. The house party gathered through the second week. Carriages came up the avenue in the wet afternoons and disgorged their cargo of silk and ambition. The purpose of the gathering was an open secret. The Dowager Duchess, the Duke's mother, had decided it was past time her son married, and she had selected the bride herself, and the bride had been invited along with 24 others so that the choice might wear the costume of a free one. The bride was Lady Eulalia Bossiny. Lady Eulalia was everything Demelza was not, and knew it, and made certain everyone else knew it too. She was beautiful in the cool, finished way of a portrait, with a fortune to match the Duke's own, and a laugh she deployed like a small, bright weapon. She had been raised from the cradle to be exactly this, the correct woman in the correct room, and the certainty of it sat on her like a perfume. She found Demelza interesting the way a cat finds a moth interesting. "You poor creature," she said to Demelza on the first evening, in the corridor outside the music room, where no one could hear, and so the words could be said plainly. "To be sentenced to that mouse of a girl. Do they even let you keep your own name down here, or are you simply called the companion?" It was said sweetly with a smile, in the polished voice of a woman who has never once in her life been hungry. Demelza answered that she was very content in her place, and Lady Eulalia laughed her bright little laugh and swept on into the candlelight satisfied, and did not see the Duke standing in the shadow of the stair where the corridor turned, where he had heard the whole of it, and where his jaw had set like something carved from the cliff. The dowager watched her son with the patience of a general. She had not failed to notice that his slate eyes followed the gray companion across a room. She told herself it meant nothing, a man's idle wandering. Beneath comment. Then she watched him decline to sit by Lady Eulalia at supper a second time, and she stopped telling herself anything at all and began, quietly, to plan Mrs. Carnso brought the first warning up the back stairs a few evenings later. With the second candle, she was not supposed to spare. The housekeeper had been mending linen beyond the morning room and had heard the dowager through a half-open door, speaking low to Mrs. Trembath. "The clergyman's girl forgets what she is," the dowager had said. "A companion is furniture that walks. See that she is reminded of it before she gives my son the wrong idea of her worth, Mrs. Drea." Carnso repeated it plainly, because she thought Demelza ought to know which way the wind set in that house. And Demelza thanked her, and folded the warning away with the rest of what she carried, and did not let it show on her face. Demelza's days were small and full. She woke before the family. She walked Rosenwyn to the chapel, and back through the dripping gardens. She read aloud, she sorted ribbons, she sat through the long evenings in the corner, with her plain hands folded while the company played at cards, and the rain came down the windows. And in those evenings more and more she felt the weight of a particular regard. She did not look for it. She did not have to. She could feel the Duke's attention the way one feels a fire across a cold room, and she taught herself with great discipline not to turn toward the warmth. He spoke to her seldom and always briefly. He asked her once whether the girl was eating, because he had noticed Rosenwyn pushing her food about the plate, and Demelza answered that Lady Rosenwyn was a little homesick, and he said only, "See that she eats," which the rest of the table heard as a cold command, and which Demelza alone understood as something else. As a man who had once watched grief starve a person he loved and could not bear to watch it happen again. He fetched her a shawl another evening, when the fire had burned low and he had seen her press her thin arms close against the chill, and he did it in silence, draping it across the back of her chair as he passed, so that no one might remark it, and she sat very still beneath the small warmth of it for the rest of the night. These were not declarations. A man of his rank did not declare himself to a hired companion. They were observations, made flesh, the actions of a person who looked at the world with terrible accuracy and could not help acting on what he saw. The trouble began with a letter. Lady Rosenwyn had a sweetheart. Demelza had guessed it within a week from the way the girl flinched and brightened at the post, and had drawn the truth out of her gently over many quiet hours, the way one coaxes a frightened animal to a hand. He was a young naval lieutenant named Mr. Ketter Carveth, the second son of a Falmouth merchant family, with no fortune of his own and nothing to recommend him to a guardian's eye, except that Rosenwyn loved him with the whole of her small terrified heart. They had met before the inheritance fell, before she became a prize. He had gone to sea. He wrote to her in secret, and she wrote back, and the writing was the only happiness in her gilded cage. Trembath, had she known, would have ended the correspondence, and very likely the engagement of any servant suspected of carrying it. So the letters came addressed to Demelza, and Demelza passed them on, and held her tongue because the girl's small, forbidden happiness seemed to her a thing worth protecting at some cost. On the evening of the necklace, Rosenwyn had received a letter that frightened her. Mr. Carveth's ship was ordered to the Mediterranean. He would be gone 2 years. He begged her, if she loved him, to find some way to come to him before the ship sailed, or to send him some token, some proof that her heart had not been married off in his absence. And the girl, in her terror, had done a foolish, desperate thing. She had taken her grandmother's pearls from the case on the mantel, the Roskier pearls that the dowager had lent her to wear that very night as a mark of favor, and she had meant to pledge them in the village against the cost of a passage, and she had hidden them in her work-basket, and the clasp had broken in her shaking hands, and she had panicked. And she had wept, and she had told Demelza everything in a rush of whispers in the half-hour before the company gathered. Demelza had the pearls in her own pocket at that moment. She had taken them from the girl to keep her from ruin. She had meant to mend the clasp and restore them to the case before they were missed, and she had been a quarter of an hour too slow. So when the dowager opened the empty case and the room turned, Demelza understood the whole shape of the thing in an instant. If the truth came out, Rosenwyn was finished. A young heiress caught stealing her own betrothal pearls to fund an elopement with a penniless sailor would be locked away and married off within the month to whatever man would still have her, and the small frightened life she had tried to save would be crushed flat. If Demelza spoke, The girl was ruined. If Demelza was silent, the girl was ruined more slowly and more surely, because the dowager would turn the whole house over looking for a thief, and the truth would surface, and the punishment would fall where it always fell. There was one other way. A companion could be a thief. A companion could be turned off without a character and sent down the avenue in disgrace, and the household would sigh and say they had always thought there was something furtive about her, and the pearls would be quietly restored, and Lady Rosenwyn would be saved, and the matter would close over like water over a dropped stone. It cost only one woman, and that woman was nobody. "The fault is mine, Your Grace," Demelza said again into the ringing quiet. "I had the pearls last. I do not know how the clasp came to break. I will make it good, every pearl, if it takes the rest of my life." It was the wrong thing to say, and she knew it the moment it left her, because a thief does not offer to repay. A thief denies. She had confessed like an honest woman confessing to something she had not done, and the Duke, who heard everything, heard that too. The dowager closed the velvet case with a small final snap. "You will go to your room," she said, "and you will not leave it, and in the morning my son will decide what is to be done with you." Demelza curtsied and went, and did not look at Rosenwyn, because to look at her would have been to undo everything, and she climbed the back stair to the cold little room under the eaves, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the dark and let herself, for 1/4 of an hour, be afraid. What she did not know was that she had a witness she had not counted on. The dowager, you see, had not waited for morning. The dowager had seen her opportunity arrive gift-wrapped, and she meant to use it. Here was the gray companion her son had been watching, exposed as a thief in front of the entire company, ruined past any rescue. By morning the girl would be gone, and the small inconvenient softness in the Duke's eyes would go with her, and Lady Eulalia's path would be clear. The dowager intended that nothing should disturb this excellent arrangement. So, before she slept, she took 2 precautions, because she was not a careless woman and she had not held her place for 40 years by leaving things to chance. First, she sent for the housekeeper and instructed her, in the plainest terms, that the companion was to speak to no one before she left, and that any servant who carried a message to or from that room would be turned off the same day, without a character. Mrs. Carnso, who had grown fond of Demelza, heard this with a still face and a sinking heart, and understood that her own bread was now staked against the girl's defense. Second, and worse, the dowager arranged the evidence. She knew the pearls had not been truly stolen. Of course she did not care. She wanted the story to hold, and a story holds better when it has a thing inside it. So she had her own woman slip down to Demelza's room while the household supped and tuck into the bottom of the companion's small trunk, beneath the 3 made-over gowns, a pawnbroker's ticket from a shop in the town made out 3 days prior, for a string of pearls. The dowager had purchased it herself, through an intermediary, for exactly this purpose, against exactly such a night. She had been a guardian of this family's name through 3 decades of scandals, and she had learned that a name is kept clean not by truth, but by management. Now the trap had teeth. If Demelza spoke the truth, that Lady Rosenwyn had taken the pearls, the pawn ticket in her own trunk would brand her a liar, protecting herself with a fresh lie, and the truth would die unbelieved. The dowager had not merely accepted a convenient confession. She had built a wall around it. The Duke came to the library very late that night, and he did not sleep, and the candle burned down beside the estate books he did not read. He was turning the evening over in his exact and patient mind. He had watched the companion's hands all through supper, and her hands had told him a story. Her mouth had not. He had seen her, an hour before the necklace was missed, walk Lady Rosenwyn up the stairs with an arm about the girl's shoulders, and a look of fierce, gentle worry on her plain face, the look of a person carrying someone else's burden. He had seen the girl come down white and shaking. He had seen the companion's hand press once hard against the pocket of her gray gown as though to be sure of something hidden there. A thief is furtive about her gain. Demelza had been furtive about a rescue. The Duke knew the difference, the way he knew his own land in the dark. he sent for Penberthy at dawn. In the cold grey of the early morning before the house woke, the Duke gave his steward 3 instructions, low and even, the way he gave all his commands. He bid Penberthy ride to the town and call upon the pawnbroker whose name was known to every steward in the county, and learn the truth of any pearls pledged there, in the last week, by whom, and on what day. He bid him call also upon the posting inn, and ask quietly whether any letters had come and gone for the household, by hands other than the regular post. And he bid him do both before noon, and tell no one, and on no account let his errand reach his mother's ears. Penberthy, who had served the family man and boy, looked at his master and understood that something had shifted in the house, and that his Duke, who had not troubled himself about the happiness of any living soul since his brother drowned, was troubling himself now. He said only, "Your Grace," and went for his horse. The morning at Trelawarren passed under a strange held breath. The company knew, of course. By the time the chocolate was carried up, every lady and gentleman in the house knew that the companion had stolen the Roskier pearls and was to be sent away in disgrace, and they discussed it over the cold meats with the comfortable horror of people enjoying a misfortune that cannot touch them. Lady Eulalia was at her brightest. She had heard the whole tale by 9 o'clock, and had improved it in the telling by 10, and she made certain, in her cool, laughing way, that the company understood there had always been something not quite right about a clergyman's daughter, put above her station. One pities her, naturally, Lady Eulalia said over the breakfast table, in the voice of a woman pitying no one. But what can one expect? Give a person of that sort the run of a great house, and the temptation is simply too much for them. It is almost cruel to put them in the way of it. The verdict traveled down the table and out into the corridors and up the back stairs the way such things do, and reached the cold little room under the eaves, where the woman it described sat dressed and waiting with her hands folded, having packed her small trunk before she slept, not knowing what had been packed into it without her leave. Rosenwyn was kept from her. The girl tried twice to climb the back stair, and twice Mrs. Trembath turned her about with a sharp word about taking no notice of disgraced servants, and the second time the girl wept, and her aunt mistook the weeping for the soft heart of a foolish child, and was pleased to think she would harden it. Demelza waited. She had decided what she would do. She would say nothing. She would take the disgrace and the empty road, and she would trust that a girl saved by it might one day somewhere be happy. And that would have to be enough, because it was all she had to give, and she had decided to give it. She did not know that, down in the town, at that hour, Penberthy was standing in a low, dark shop, watching a pawnbroker turn the leaves of his ledger with a slow, careful finger. She did not know that the pawnbroker, pressed by the steward of the greatest house in the county, was growing uneasy, and that the unease in his face was the first crack in the dowager's wall. What? The Duke did not send for Demelza in the morning, as his mother had announced he would. He let the morning pass. He let the company gather, restless and curious, in the long drawing-room after their meal, because he wished the matter settled where it had begun, in front of the same eyes that had watched it open. The dowager mistook his delay for the proper deliberation of a man preparing to dismiss a servant, and she was content. Lady Eulalia mistook it for nothing at all, and arranged herself near the fire to her best advantage. It was past noon when Penberthy rode back up the avenue, and his horse was lathered, and he came not to the stables but to the side door, and he was carrying something in his coat. The Duke had Demelza brought down. She came into the drawing-room in her grey gown with her chin level, as she had stood the night before, and the room arranged itself against her 24 faces composed into the particular mild contempt that good society reserves for the fallen. The dowager sat at the head of it all, very upright, the closed velvet case on the table at her side, like a small coffin. Rosenwyn sat by the window where she had sat the night before, gripping the arm of her chair, and Demelza, crossing the room, gave the girl one look, level and steadying, that said as plainly as a touch, "Say nothing. I have chosen this. Let me give it to you." "Your Grace," Demelza said to the Duke, and curtsied, and waited to be cast out, The Duke did not cast her out. He stood by the cold hearth, with his hands behind his back. And he looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at his mother, and he began in his even and unhurried voice to ask questions. "You say the pearls were on the mantel an hour before they were missed." "They were," said the dowager, "and the companion had charge of Lady Rosenwyn through that hour." "She did. And no other person came or went from this room in that time." The dowager's certainty did not waver. "No other," she said. "I have considered it carefully. The thing is plain." "It is not yet plain to me," the Duke said. A small stir went through the room. This was not the script. The companion was to be dismissed, the unpleasantness closed, the day restored to its pleasures. The dowager's spine grew, if anything, straighter. "My son," she said with the gentle steel she used to bring him to heel, "this is a matter for the housekeeper, not for you. The girl has confessed. Let her be sent off, and let us hear no more of it." She confessed. The Duke agreed. She confessed, and then she offered to repay every pearl across the whole of her life. "I have known thieves. I have sat in judgment at the assizes beside the magistrate of this county more times than I can count. I have never yet met the thief who confessed, and in the same breath begged to make restitution. A thief denies. An honest person confesses to spare another. I should like to know whom she is sparing." He let that settle. He let it travel the room, and into the silence he turned, not to Demelza, but to the small white figure by the window. "Lady Rosenwyn," he said, and his voice gentled because he had no wish to break the girl, only the lie. "When did the clasp of the necklace break?" The girl made a sound. It was not a word. It was the small, high sound of a creature that has been holding its breath beyond its strength, and Demelza took one step toward her on instinct. To shield her even now, and the Duke lifted one hand, the smallest motion that stopped her where she stood. "I will tell you what I believe," the Duke said to the room, and to no one, in the same level tone. "I believe a frightened young woman did a foolish thing, and that another woman who had nothing in this world but her own good name gave that name up to save her. I believe the theft was a rescue wearing a thief's coat, and I sent my steward to the town this morning to learn whether I was right." The dowager's hands closed on the arms of her chair. For the first time something crossed her face that was not certainty, and it was gone in an instant, mastered. But the Duke had seen it, and so had Demelza, and so watching from his place by the door, with his coat still damp from the road, had Penberthy. "Aye, you sent your steward," the dowager repeated. "I did. There is a pawnbroker in the town who knows every steward in the county. My mother knows him too, I think." The Duke did not raise his voice. "Mr. Penberthy, what did you find?" Penberthy came forward. He had a slip of paper in one hand and a small, square, ugly fact in his face that he plainly wished he did not have to deliver before this company. "Your Grace," he said, "there were no pearls pledged at that shop. Not this week, nor any week this season. The pawnbroker keeps an honest ledger, and showed it to me freely. Every line," he hesitated. "But he had something to tell me. He said that 3 days past a woman he did not know, a servant by her dress, came in, and bought from him a blank ticket, an old voided one, for a string of pearls, paid him well above its worth and asked no questions and gave no name. He thought it queer. He thought it queerer still when I came asking. So he wrote down, after she left, the day and the look of her, against trouble. He gave me the page. The room had gone entirely still. Penberthy held out the slip, and the Duke took it and read it, and did not change expression, and passed it without a word to his mother, who did not take it. "There is a pawn ticket," the Duke said, "in the bottom of the companion's trunk, beneath her gowns. I have not looked because I did not need to. I knew it would be there the moment my steward described what he had found. Someone bought a false ticket 3 days ago and hid it in that trunk last night, so that if the companion ever told the truth would die as a thief's excuse. It was well done." It was the work of a careful mind that has kept this family clean of scandal for 40 years, and did not see this time that it was making one. He turned at last to the dowager. He did not gloat. There was no triumph in it. There was something closer to grief, the grief of a son who has loved his mother and has just seen exactly who she is, and cannot unsee it. "You bought her disgrace, madam," he said, "to clear a path you thought I wanted. You did not ask me what I wanted." The dowager rose. She was a proud woman, and she did not crumple, not all at once. She gathered her certainty about her one last time and made her stand, because she had truly believed, to the bottom of her hard old heart, that she was protecting something worth protecting. "Everything I have done," she said, and her voice was not quite as even as it had been, "I have done for this house, for your name. You think me cruel. I think me the only person in this room willing to do the unpleasant work of keeping you what you were born to be. That girl is nothing. The bossiny matches everything. I will not apologize for knowing the difference." "No," the Duke said. "You know rank. You have never once in your life been able to tell rank from worth. That has been the whole tragedy of you." It was the only hard thing he said to her, and he said it quietly, and it landed harder than any shout. The dowager's mouth worked. She looked about the room, at the 24 faces that had been so comfortably arranged against the companion a moment before, and were now arranging themselves, with the swift loyalty of society, against her instead. She found no ally there. Even Lady Eulalia had gone very still and very pale, and was looking at the carpet, having grasped, with the quickness that had always served her, that the correct woman in the correct room was about to become the wrong one. The dowager sat down. She did not weep. She put one hand over her eyes for the space of 3 breaths, and when she took it away her face had aged, and the fight had gone out of it, and what was left was an old woman who had spent 40 years certain she was right, and had just been shown in front of everyone, whose opinion she had given her life to managing, that she had been wrong about the only thing that mattered. "Lady Rosenwind," the Duke said into the wreckage very gently, "you need not speak. I think we all understand. The pearls are not stolen. They are in this room, I should imagine, with the person who took them to keep you from a worse mistake. Is that not so?" And Demelza, because the wall had come down and the truth could no longer harm the girl, drew the pearls from the pocket of her gray gown, where they had lain against her all this while, knotted in a square of linen with the broken clasp, and she laid them on the table beside the empty case, and the candlelight found them, and a sound went round the room, and the thing was over. Rosenwind broke then. She came across the room in a rush of skirts and tears and caught Demelza's hands and said in front of everyone, in a voice at last too full to be afraid, "She did it for me. I took them. I was going to sell them. She tried to stop me, and I would not be stopped. And she let them name her the thief, so they would send her away instead of me." The girl turned to the Duke, white and shaking and braver than she had ever been in her life. "Punish me, your grace, not her. Never her." The Duke looked at the 2 women, the frightened girl and the steady one, and something in his hard face eased that had not eased in a long while. "No one is to be punished," he said. "Lady Rosenwind, you will write to your young man at sea, and you will tell him the truth, which is that you are not yet free to come to him, and that you will not throw yourself away to do it. You will wait. 2 years is not so long when one is 18. And you will not steal pearls again, because the next time there may be no one in the house good enough to ruin herself for you, and that would be a great pity, for there is no one else in this house her equal." He said the last to the room. He said it looking at Demelza. And in the silence that followed, the silence of 24 people recalculating everything they had decided, about a woman in plain gray, the Duke crossed the floor. He crossed the whole long room, past his mother, past Lady Eulalia by the fire, past the table with its pearls and its empty case, and he stopped in front of the companion, and the company watched a duke stop in front of a clergyman's penniless daughter as though she were the only person in Cornwall. "Miss Trevithen," he said. It was the first time he had used her name. In 3 weeks he had said the companion, or the girl, or nothing at all. And now he said her name, plainly, the way one names something one has decided to keep, and Demelza felt it go through her like the first warmth after a long cold. "You will not leave this house," the Duke said. His voice was low and entirely level and carried to every corner of the room, not as a companion, and not in disgrace. He paused, and the whole room leaned toward the pause. "Leave it instead as my wife, the Duchess of Rusker." He did not kneel. He did not make a speech. He had said it in one short sentence and let it stand, and he waited, with his slate eyes on her face, for her answer, while the room held its breath and the rain came down the tall windows. Demelza could not speak at first. She had schooled herself for 3 weeks not to turn toward the warmth, and now the warmth had crossed the room and was standing in front of her asking to be let in, and the discipline of a lifetime cracked all at once and let the truth out. "I am nobody, your grace," she said. It was not a refusal. It was the last honest thing she had to lay on the table between them. "You're the only somebody I have found in a house full of names," the Duke said. "I have watched you for 3 weeks. Give away everything you owned, which was your good name, to a girl who could not pay you back, and ask for nothing, and expect nothing. And I have never in my life seen anything I wanted more to spend the rest of it near. I am not a poet. I cannot say it better than that. Will you have me?" It was not quite a question, and she did not quite answer it in words. She put her hand into his, her bare, cold hand into his, and that was the answer, and his fingers closed over hers. And the room let out its breath, and somewhere near the fire, Lady Eulalia rose with great composure and announced that she found she had developed the headache and would lie down, and no one marked her going, which was, for a woman like Lady Eulalia, the cruelest punishment the day could have devised, and the only one she received. The dowager left Trelawarren within the week. She was not cast out. The Duke gave her the dower house at Pencarrow Abbey, a fine establishment 3 miles off, and a generous settlement, and his coldly correct escort to her carriage, and he did not refuse to see her again, and he did not forgive her quickly. She went with her dignity stitched back together as well as it would go, and the county understood that the Dowager Duchess had retired to the Abbey for her health, which was the polite fiction agreed upon, and which was a mercy she had not earned, and was wise enough at the last to take. Before she went, she did one thing that surprised everyone, including herself. She sent for Demelza, alone, and looked at her a long while, and said only, "He chose better than I would have let him. I find that I am old enough to be glad of it, though it costs me to say so." It was not an apology. It was as near as a woman of her making could come to one. And Demelza, who had learned long ago to take small mercies for what they were, accepted it as enough. If Demelza's quiet courage moved you, stay a moment more, for how it ended, because the best of it came after the drawing-room emptied. In the small ordinary days that followed, Lady Rosingwyn wrote her letter to Mr. Gain. Carveth the honest one, and waited as she had been bid. And when his ship came home, 2 years on with prize money in his pocket and a lieutenant's promotion to a captaincy, she married him with the Duke's blessing, and a portion of her own great fortune settled where no guardian could touch it, and she was, by every account, foolishly and entirely happy. She named her first daughter Demelza. She said she could think of no better thing to give the child than that name and the kind of friend who would earn it, Mrs. Carnso kept her place and her bread, and was made housekeeper in fact as well as name, with a wage to match, and wept openly at the wedding, and was not ashamed of it. Mr. Penberthy, who had ridden through the rain to bring back the small ugly truth that broke the wall, found a brace of fine horses in his stable a month later with no note attached, and understood, and said nothing, which was how he and his Duke had always understood one another. The Duke married her in the chapel at the foot of the dripping gardens, the same chapel Demelza had walked Rosingwyn down to on the cold grey mornings of her servitude, and she walked the path this time in a gown that was not grey, and not made over, and not worn at the cuff, and the Cornish damp did not reach her bones because he had given her, among a great many other things, a warm cloak lined with fur, and the right to be cold no longer. They did not become loud people. He remained a man who went still before he spoke, and noticed everything and forgave slowly. And she remained a woman who had been taught Latin and the names of the stars and the hard art of surviving unseen, and now was seen, and did not yet quite know what to do with so much being seen and learned. In the evenings, when the company was gone and the great house was quiet, they sat in the library where he had first heard her speak, and he read the estate books, and she read her father's small worn Sophocles, and sometimes she read it aloud to him in the Greek endosec, and he listened with his slate eyes half closed, and a stillness on him that was no longer the stillness of grief. On the first cold night of their first autumn married, she came down to find that he had pulled a chair close to the library fire and laid her shawl across the back of it, the same plain gray shawl from the night he had fetched it for her without a word, kept all this while, when she had thought it lost. He did not explain it. He only watched her see it. And Demelza understood that this was how he loved, not in speeches, but in the small exact acts, of a man who looked at the world with terrible care and could not help acting on what he saw. And she crossed the warm room and sat down in the chair he had readied for her, and drew the old shawl about her shoulders, though she no longer had any need of it. And the fire moved on the spines of the books, and the rain came down the tall dark windows of the house that was at last, and against every expectation, her home.